okay, they're just, and these people's lives were completely ripped apart, taken out of their homes. I mean, and we can't even underestimate the magnitude of that. They None of that stuff was rebuilt. I mean, it's just crazy. But yeah, let's get to hands. Sorry, guys, I'm rambling, but I just wanted to share this with you so that you guys are aware of how much counterterrorism, military deployments are very much alive and going all over the world. Go ahead, Truth. Hi, Truth. Thanks for coming.
Hey, thank you, Mace. Interesting, thought-provoking topic as always. Yeah, that's an interesting date for when Benjamin Netanyahu put out his book fighting terrorism. He was actively involved in politics, long before 1995 as an ambassador, and he held other positions as well. By 93, he was actually official opposition of the Likud party. But his whole notion of terrorism, I mean, he came up with the notion of Islamic terrorism. He planted the seed for it. I think it was around 1982 or 83 at this conference in D.C., in Washington, D.C., where he was discussing it with some other, within a think tank, essentially. And then he would go on to continue promoting it. And then I guess he captured a lot of his own thoughts and notions of it within that book. And it's interesting the date of the year of the release, because that was the same year that, well, in fact, some terrorism occurred in Israel itself when Yitzhak Rabin was assassinated by Yigal Amir that same year, by a Jewish radical extremist who assassinated, then Prime Minister Rabin. And there are some who actually accused Netanyahu of having something to do with it. We'll never really know when. We'll know what exactly, because consider it's classified. Those are certain files that we'll never get to see, essentially, by the equivalent of the, call it CIA, I guess, within Israel would probably be Mossad or maybe Shin Bet equivalent. They would have the details of that assassination. But then come 96, you then have the request for the clearing of the Iran policy paper, right, whereby Israel wanted to gain some kind of self-sufficiency on its own by neutralizing its immediate threats to it, being Iraq, Syria, ultimately Iran, through collaboration with its allies, Turkey, Egypt, and Jordan. And so then they needed a pretext for it as well. And they would go on to expand on the same thesis through PNAC, Project for a New American Century. And these were, again, drafted by the same neocons within the State Department. I think for this one, it was Robert Kagan, Richard Pearl, and the other ones were, I believe it was David Wormser, Doug Faith, and who am I missing? Richard Pearl, Doug Faith. Oh, yeah, Paul Wolfowitz as well. So both of them, all of them, dual nationals or with dual loyalties to both the U.S. and Israel as well. And so they ultimately needed a pretext to be able to, launch this war on terror. Because if you recall, by 91, the USSR had voluntarily collapsed, and so there was no longer the Iron Curtain. So they needed a new pretext to be able to keep their perpetual wars going, because they love their perpetual wars because they're very good for business. So there's no profit in peace. They need to keep the military-industrial complex busy so they can keep the likes of Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, Northrop Grumman, Boeing. Got to keep them in business. And it's funny because the sentiment of the U.S. historically has always been that they hate communism, yet they have no problems, providing subsidies and funding for the military-industrial complex or even the banking industry when it went through its brief collapse in 2008. When you had various big banks just folding, and many more would have folded had it not been for the intervention of the U.S. government. But yeah, I mean, come 2001, you mentioned Larry Silverstein. That's a very interesting story, and it can't be underscored enough about how much involvement he actually had. Not only was he good friends with Benjamin Netanyahu, he was also the head of the United Jewish Appeal, which is one of the biggest fundraisers in the world for Israel. It's raising about
$4 billion check this guy got.
No,
$4 billion.
No, Mace, it was much more.
Oh, well, the insurance part.
No,
Sorry,
it
the
was much
insurance
more
part.
than that. It was much more than that. I'll get there. But anyway,
Damn.
he had a lot of connections, actually. So a year before the attacks, actually, because he owned Tower 7 as well, right? And he was looking to rebuild it, redesign it, and he'd already presented his blueprint to then Mayor of New York, Michael Bloomberg. And of course, he'd get approval for that. he needed a demolition job for that too, and he'd acquired both towers, both twin towers, by what, July of 2001, and it was bought from the head of the Port Authority at that time, Louis Eisenberg, I
Wait,
believe
wait,
was his
wait,
name.
wait, hold on. He got so wait, you're telling me, okay, I thought he only was owning the building 7. Wasn't he just he owned all of them?
He owned all three. Well, okay, no, let's be clear
What the
about the
fuck?
language. So he had
Wow.
signed a 99-year lease. He put down $14 million of his own cash, and then he acquired another $100 million from his investors. And so he'd made 2 interest payments by the time they both went down, because the deal closed in July of 2001. And then in August of 2001, he doubled down on his insurance coverage and also structured it as instant cash payout. So this way there would be no delays in getting paid. Somehow he knew. Now you tell me, Mace, who buys more insurance than they need? Because when he first signed off on the lease, he already had insurance with it. He was required to have it. But somehow this guy, Lucky Larry they call him, had the foresight to double down on his insurance coverage, terrorism coverage to be specific, and also structure
What?
as
I was about
cash
to ask
payout.
you what yeah,
Yeah,
it
I
was
always rush
so
through all these facts, so I apologize. A lot of it gets missed because I've told this story
it's
so many
okay.
times.
I'm
So I know
slowing you
exactly. That's
down.
the
It's
palm of my
not one
hand,
of those
right?
spaces.
I can recite it, and I'm not
Yeah.
looking at any notes right now. I'm looking at
Just
your new profile picture as we speak. So, anyway,
sometimes I
to
just
go on,
have like because I'm shocked at that. I'm shocked that he was involved
yeah,
in all three. And then you're saying he doubled down the insurance, meaning did
he
he
doubled
add
down
the
on his insurance
terrorism piece to
coverage,
it?
and he structured it as instant cash payout. And this guy was also the head at that time of the United Jewish Appeals New York chapter, which is the biggest fundraiser for Israel at that time, the fifth largest fundraiser in the world. So it was interesting because after 9/11, when Benjamin Netanyahu said that, it was very good for Israel, well, now you know what he meant, because well, that fundraiser just generated billions of dollars. Now to now to now to decipher exactly how much was made, I'll get there in a second. But the day of the attacks, you know, let's not forget that two two planes struck two towers. He had three towers go down. Well, how did that third tower go down? It was another controlled demolition, as were the other two. That's I think you covered that quite or in some detail with Matthew Tower, and I believe he covers it in his movies as well. But anyway, there was well over 100 different testimonies that confirm this as well, that they heard the sound of bombs go off in the lobby of the towers after that first tower was hit. So there's eyewitness testimony. It was captured on footage. It's in Ryan Dawson's movies as well. He actually recorded it on VHS because all of that coverage was removed from television news stations, because they didn't want people recalling those facts, and they wanted to stick to their narrative. There was actually planes that took it down, and they want to claim jet fuel, but that those are all lies. So with respect to the return that he made on investment, he put 14 million of his own money down, 100 million of his investors, 2 interest payments. He initially got $3.5 billion from the insurance company instant cash. He sued and got an extra billion because he claimed it was 2 separate attacks. But then he also sued the insurance companies of the airlines, and he's able to get another 9.5 billion out of it. So he made a total of $14 billion in total from 9/11. So he took his $14 million investment and made about $14 billion off of it. They call him Lucky Larry. Another fun fact about that day is Lucky Larry is very regimented. Every day he'd eat breakfast in the exact same spot in the towers. I believe it was the 91st floor where he'd have breakfast on, except that day. I think he had like a dermatology appointment. That's what his daughter said, or something like that. Just a coincidence. Somebody had the foresight to not be there the day of the attacks. Who really knows, right? And apparently some others had a heads up as well from a certain tribe. You can guess where they're from. But yeah, so it was a very good return on investment. And it was also then used as a pretext, essentially, to launch the so-called war on terror, starting with Afghanistan, which at that time was the largest exporter of opium poppy fields, right? Which actually was shut down to almost zero by the Taliban. So that was one reason to go in. Afghanistan is also, of course, rich in oil, natural gas, and other mining resources. In fact, 2/3 of the oil of the world at that time, appraised at that time, was essentially in the Middle East. And as Dick Cheney put it, that's just too valuable of a resource to leave in the hands of the Arabs. So they needed a way in to be able to, get out all that cheap oil, because just having a good deal with Saudi Arabia wasn't enough. And so you'll note that when I believe it was General Wesley Clark who said the plan is to go in and destroy about 7 countries in 5 years, they did about 8 and 10 roughly. So it started with Afghanistan, then Iraq, then it was, I believe, Libya, then Syria, and then they did hit up Yemen as well, and then of course Lebanon in 2006, squeezed that in, and let's not forget the bombings of Pakistan and Somalia. So, and they ultimately did want to get to Iran. I don't want to, again, I know you have some hands, just very
That is
quickly.
their goal. That's their number one. That's
It
their, I
was.
think Iran, yeah,
It was. And to tell you
I agree.
just how serious they took an invasion of Iran, they spent $250 million on the Millennium Challenge. So it was a military simulation exercise where they actually went about an invasion to see if they could successfully invade and destroy Iran. And they found that within 24 hours, despite 2 years of prep, $250 million, and it was led by a general and over 1,200 U.S. soldiers, they found that they would not be successful at that invasion. So they shelved it at that time. But I mean, they've since gone gone back to it to see if they could go about it successfully. But Iran's only grown more powerful since then. I mean, they've got very good air defense systems. They make their own. They've got hypersonic missiles. They make their own drones. They have an air force as well. That's well, we thought we had no idea about it, but in fact, they have taken possession of their Sukhoi 35S model fighter jets from Russia, which are among the best in the world that you can get. It's right up there with the F-35s. So, I mean, they're definitely a force to be reckoned.
That experience. But if we can't step out of our own personal emotions and actually look at the world and say, okay, we have this NATO, okay, that is essentially going to geostrategically find conflict and terrorism to be able to go after it. What they've done with the destabilization of all those countries and turning sex against sex to weaken themselves. This has been a thing. It's all been written, actually. It's been documented. I have a few sources for you guys if you're interested in reading that. I'd read it in Spaces. It's probably recorded too. But my point is when you look back in Iran's history, since the beginning, through now to to unpin them. We tend to baseline against a lot of these beliefs that we don't even realize that we inherently adopted because it's been so repetitive. But and the whole point of this, guys, is because I think it's our responsibility now, especially when this nation of ours, based on our belief of that being the danger, has a green light to go and wreak havoc. Sorry, go ahead, Truth.
Sure, yeah. I mean, Iran is a whole space on its own. It's a complicated topic. There's a lot of nuance there with respect to the history of Iran. I mean, it goes back over 6,000 years. But if you just want to look at it since World War II, essentially, I mean, they did have a democratically elected government through with the prime minister. They got deposed in 1953 by what we later find out was an operation done by both the CIA and MI6, to have Dr. Mossadegh removed because he wants to nationalize the Iranian oil industry. And then they installed the Shah from essentially 53 to 79 until that revolution you just mentioned. Again, the U.S. didn't like that. And it was the students that overtook the embassy, the U.S. embassy, for like 400 days, which then led to the Iran-Iraq War.
Truth, how did they find Khomeini? How did they even, because helping install him implies that they must have met him. Like, do you know any of that? That's probably way too deep into
Well,
the
I mean, he was
details,
in
but
France.
if anybody
He was
knows.
expelled from Iran because he was spreading his his
Oh,
Islamic Shiite ideology, and then he was brought back in. Essentially, I mean, listen, this was a coordinated effort. It wasn't just he didn't just magically appear in Iran to then essentially replace the Shah. The Shah was first expelled, and then Khomeini did come in and essentially take power through what became a military occupation and a revolution, right? Because they switched allegiance, but there were other powers that beat. But again, there's classified documents that we may not ever get access to. What we did learn from that 79 revolution is when those students took over the embassy, is they were able to determine that that embassy was actually being used as a spy agency of the CIA, and that's where they were able to find the documents to confirm what took place in '53. There was the CIA and MI6 that did that coup to switch governments slash regimes from democracy to the regime of the Shah. But yeah, real quick with Iran, I'll wrap because you got hands, and that's that. It's always been a prized aspiration of the U.S. and Israel to be able to both neutralize it, contain it, keep them as a partner as they had during the Shah's reign, because it's another cheap source of oil, just like Saudi Arabia was. In addition to everything you could possibly desire with respect to mining resources, natural gas, and also human capital as well. It could have been they were a great asset to the U.S., but they were basically a vassal state because they didn't even have real control of their oil industry. They're just essentially receiving royalties from it, which is how the U.S. likes it. They don't like it when countries nationalize and take control of their own resources. So yeah, Iran remains, they call it a rogue country just because they've gone about becoming self-sufficient. They don't really need U.S. or Western help anymore. They've been able to navigate despite about 5,000 financial sanctions. They were actually the most heavily sanctioned country in the world until 2022 when Russia overtook it. And they've got over 18,000 sanctions lobbied against them, Western-backed sanctions, since the Ukraine special military operation. But thanks to Iran helped actually Russia circumnavigate a lot of those sanctions through 45 years of struggle. Because when you kicked off the SWIFT system, you got to find a way to trade, sell your oil, sell your natural gas and natural resources without the benefit of being able to close or settle your debts with a Western bank in U.S. dollars. You can't do it. So you need to try and establish either bilateral ties with another country, which a lot of countries with,
and truth, they
or
still didn't cave, no
or
matter
barter.
what. That
No,
just shows you they didn't sell out. Sorry, go ahead.
no, they didn't, and they could have. Right at any point, they could have taken the easy way out. They certainly didn't need to keep a line item on their budget to support Palestine for decades, which they've done consistently, provided funding, arms, military intelligence, and they taught them how to build tunnels essentially so that these resistance groups actually have a shot at taking out the IOF. They've also helped Hezbollah in Lebanon, Ansarullah in Yemen, and of course they've wiped clean most of ISIS in Iraq and Syria. They're still there, of course. Those battles continue. So it's been an ongoing struggle, right? Because
Yeah, and people don't know. Like, you know what? I'm glad you're here, and we are going to move around the hands, but you guys are going to have to. I want Truth to talk slower this time, so sometimes it might take a while. But if you guys had an idea what has been done in Syria, what's been done in Lebanon, like even when they called it a civil war and whatnot, a lot of that was put in place by the West. It's crazy. And how they like would there's I actually looked up to see the terrorist attacks because I wanted to get some numbers. We're gonna go through these numbers, but they're what the like the level of tyranny that has been, unleashed in the Middle East that has not been made aware to the people. I'm learning about it. As you guys can tell as I'm talking to you, this is an authentic, like I had a little bit of a shock factor today. Even though I've obviously intimately been researching the Palestine situation, but little did I know the extent of this war on terrorism. So we're going to talk more about that, and I'll circle back to you, Truth, in a minute. Carlos, thanks so much for being patient. Jump in, hun.
No, absolutely. And Maze, I applaud you for having this conversation and really trying to draw, more attention to what's happening, to our country. And Truth did a fabulous job of explaining some of those things. And he mentioned that something that's very important, and that's in regards to the think tanks that really establish U.S. Foreign policy, and they leverage, their power to influence government to make these decisions. He spoke one that I encourage everyone to spend a little bit of time to research, and that was the think tank that was originally called the Project for New America Century. And that particular think tank really began the foreign policy of really advocating for change in Iraq. Truth mentioned many of the players that were involved with those think tanks. And what they do is once they cycle those think tanks, they will evolve into something new to really influence the change. And Michael Snyder and many other people kind of really kind of allude to it as super imperialism in regards to what we're witnessing, with our country, and that's that we back the dollar, we back that through our military and the military intervention that takes place, and we will utilize disruptive measures, including placing certain regimes in power and then leveraging those regimes to create chaos, create
It's a lie. I mean, it doesn't matter. That's beyond part. Is not our ally. That's a lie. I mean, it doesn't matter. That's beyond partisanship. Okay. It is beyond black, white. It is beyond anything. I mean, I will say the religious piece is a different motivation. They have different motivations that intersect. When people talk about Zionism, there more often than not three people having a conversation about Zionism or talking about three different things. And what that and that this is an intentional, I think that that's very intentional because there's this idea that it's just intended to be this safe haven for Jewish people to not be persecuted, whatever. And so why the people decided to probably go there, outside of, let's just say, the ones who orchestrated this whole thing, was based on that. But why did they orchestrate the whole thing? Was it the geostrategic positioning to be able to do and what they've been doing over the past few decades? There's another motivation that intersects with it. And then when you look at this, world domination, you can call it the Great Reset, some people call it whatever, New World Order. I don't like using that word just because I've been in this game for a long time and I recognize that there's certain words that turn people off. That's one of them. And so is the cabal. Don't ever use that word either. Okay. Just a pro tip. But the Great Reset is just a great example. I've held spaces showing intersection points, major intersection points with Zionism, and this move towards this global private public partnership, which is global fascism. They're essentially letting that corporate interests will supersede yours because these partnerships are going to allow them to write the policies together, the white papers together. So, but this is in large part when we look at our government, it's completely occupied. It's a different look of occupation, okay? The occupation is not of land, it is of government. And what they're doing is literally prioritizing all of Israel's interests at our expense. Now, the part that I wanted, to really drive though, is that until people can just focus literally on the very, let's just narrow the scope right now, understanding that we have these pro-Israel lobbies that are, this is gonna trip you guys out. The money that we're paying, like let's just say they proved the other, I don't know, it was the other week or so, $100,000 was paying for something that cost $100. This is exploiting the like to the this is it is just so criminal what's been happening. So the money that is being taken from the American people is looped around from these lobbies paying the politicians to put you on the back burner. Like, how did we get here? This is what is insane. And for us to be able to do something about it that's meaningful, it means that we all have to apply pressure at the same time. We have to put things on blast at the same time. We have to recognize that, this, if nothing else, is not good for the people. It might advance the empire, but that's never been good for the people. So that's why the tolerance thing, that little bit of like inner work of making more space for people's differences, it shouldn't, people get so fucking offended over the dumbest shit. Like I've never, maybe I didn't pay attention to it as much because I didn't, right now I understand that the only thing that's going to work is the power in numbers. That's it. That's the only thing. And you know why? That's proven. Because they're spending so much money and time and energy and effort into capturing the perception and the consent of the people. That's otherwise our agency wouldn't matter, but it does. It does. That's why I think that we all need to personally practice that. Sorry for a little bit of a rant, but let's go to Josh. Josh, jumping in.
Thanks, Maze. I love these spaces. These are awesome. I see a lot of faces. Dom, I see you down there. Alpha, Nice to see you. Truth. Every time you talk, I swear you spit fire. I don't know how I don't know how you are able to retain as much information and pull it out of the ether like you do, man. But we'll have to talk in the future. I would love to have you as a guest. But with that being said, with everything with like Israel and America and how you're always saying that Israel's not our ally, there's so many lines that connect to each other that actually backs up what you're saying. Like if you look at all of the enemies of Israel and then you look at all the countries that America has invaded, you will see a strong correlation between the two. And I don't think people make that distinction. I strongly urge people to, because it feels like every country that wants their own independence, our imperialistic military comes in and says, "No, you may not." And it's kind of messed up because we're always fed these lies, similar to what Mays was saying, not just today, but in the past, about we're fed all of this propaganda to think that all these people are our enemies when really they just want their own lives. And you have to look at how many bases our military has across the world compared to anybody else.
The mayhem, like I don't think many people, and I want to know as we're going through the hands, like what was it that catalyzed each one of you? Like there was something that made you more receptive or more open or more suspicious, to be able to like actually fathom seeing the world outside of the boxes that we were conditioned to be in. But like the reason why I want to know is because there has to be a pattern. There has to be something that can be done to make people actually fathom that it's possible. Like there's just the oh, it was something that you said about the fuck, what was it? It escaped me. Damn, it'll come back though. But it's definitely a much oh yeah, I remember now. Though if you guys think about it, that most Americans, I think by default, being and hearing things that are just so repetitive, we begin to inherently believe it. And the idea that the United States to remain as a reserve currency, most people would be like, well, of course we want that, right? Do we though? Do we? Look at what has been done since that's happened. If you really want to be honest about it, what has been done since that's happened? It's, this everything from taking it off the gold standard, then, being able to, leverage the IMF to be able to give these loans to countries that they know for development projects that they know they won't be able to pay back. And then they're kind of at the mercy of whatever requests or, resources that they want to get from there. And I'm just saying, that it's time for it to be balanced. I mean, BRICS, the Shanghai Corporation, I mean, there's a lot that's actually happening in partnership. And what they're trying to do is actually have true producing, like not just, I guess what we've been doing, which is kind of more service oriented. And by the way, one last thing, and then I'm going to go to the next hand, is that 1 out of the 8 trillion of the war on terror, 1 trillion of that is straight interest. A little over 1 trillion, actually, which is nuts. Okay, let's go to Peter. Hi, Peter. Welcome.
Hey, Maze. I think you made a really important point a little bit before this, talking about the definition of terrorism and how they've left that ambiguous. And I think I want to say a couple of things on that. I think that's important for 2 reasons. One reason is that, for one thing, what they did is they constructed an enemy that is undefeatable, because you can't defeat terrorism. It's a persistent issue, the way that they framed it. So there's no end date to any of these wars or engagements. But the other thing that they did with this that's kind of interesting is that you look at what terrorism is, and now it's not a goal-oriented effort anymore. It's a process-oriented effort. So when you have military engagements, it's not an outcome-driven. So they don't tell us what does winning look like. They never tell us what are your expectations for winning. It's just the process. So now they have us locked into these process wars instead of these outcome wars. So now they can't fail because they didn't meet their objectives, but they never told us what their objectives were. They actually constructed a situation where winning was impossible and the public should not expect them to win. And now they get to push forward with this process. And because terrorism is not a defeatable enemy, it's nebulous, there's no end date to this process either. And that, I think, shifted the entire dynamic of how the United States engages in wars. And we can see that in Afghanistan, where we were there for 20 years. And we got in there, the Taliban was in charge. We left, the Taliban was in charge. Did we win? No, it's a process. Who won? Lockheed Martin won. Raytheon won. United Systems won. They won this huge financial battle, and as far as anyone else is concerned, they can't even define what a positive goal-oriented outcome looks like. And now the second thing is, now this is transferable because terrorism was left nebulous. So it's not one specific group that you're fighting, it's terrorism. So now it could be terrorism in Afghanistan, it could be terrorism in Iraq, it could be terrorism in Yemen. So when the US Fifth Fleet sailed into Yemen and they weren't behaving themselves, according to the United States, Biden designated them a terrorist organization again for Ansarullah, and he had previously removed that. Well, now that's convenient for them to be terrorists because there's no real hard definition of this. So now there's another issue where he doesn't have to declare an actual war to go after these terrorists. So I think you hit on something really important there, and we need to pay attention to what they are not telling us with the definition, and that allows them not to tell us how long this should take or not to tell us what winning should even look like.
Absolutely. The critical success factors, right? So check this out. Since 9/11, the wars on terror have expanded across the globe, which is now in over 85 countries. If one person knew that it had expanded to 85 countries, please wave, okay? Give me a thumbs up. This is something that I would say largely is unknown. And then the extent of them. So the US deployed airstrikes against militant targets. By the way, this is I gotta split out. Okay, so they deployed airstrikes against militant targets, engaged in combat with militant targets, leading military exercises, and exporting a militarized counterterrorism model to dozens of countries through training and assistance. The narrative, tactics, funding, and institutional support of the U.S. post 9/11 wars fuel repression and corruption and escalate cycles of violence. Few Americans are aware of the extent of U.S. counterterrorism operations in Africa, in particular. In Somalia, the U.S. is conducting a large number of drone strikes and even boots on the ground combat operations against a group, Al-Shabaab, that Washington labels terrorists. While the airstrikes are a response to a U.S. foreign policy priorities, evidence in the so-called war on terror, they are also an extension of the long history of U.S. military intervention in Somalia, characterized by blunders, errors, atrocities, impunity, collusion, corruption, and a very high toll on Somali civilians. The part where it talks about the displaced citizens, like Somalia was the only country that said there's not one citizen there that has not been displaced. What the fuck? That's crazy. And these are statistics. And then the last piece, it says studies of U.S. post 9/11 operations in Somalia and Burkina Faso reveal that the U.S. counterterrorism model has caused more, not less, instability and violence. U.S. funding, training, and weapons in the name of counterterrorism often intensifies violence, and people join militant groups in retaliation. You know what I'm saying? Against this whole war on terrorism.
Yeah, and if I can,
I mean, it's nuts.
yeah, if I can just add real quick, I think that's a great point too, and I think the other thing that does when you're mentioning that is that pinning someone as terrorism dehumanizes that adversary. So it's no longer an equal battle with a peer or a near peer. Now you're designating them as a dehumanized adversary that's not worthy of coming to the table and negotiating and doing all the things that humans would be doing. Now they're designated terrorists. So now they're on a lower level and it doesn't really matter what happens to them. And I think that's what's being seen in Palestine now.
Yeah, the dehumanization. You're absolutely correct. Thanks, Peter. I believe Kadim was next, and then Patrick, and then Chet, or program. Well, yeah, we'll kind of in that order, but definitely Kadim is next. Go ahead.
Thanks, Miz. And I like the point you made that a lot of people are waking up to about Israel not being our ally. But before people realize that, because for many people, for many of the far right Zionist camp, it might be hard for them to grasp. But what's easy is that the government isn't our ally. The government isn't representative of the American people. And you see you see some far right people of the Zionist camp like Patrick Bet David talking about the anti-American Middle Eastern sentiments, and all those anti-American Middle Eastern sentiments aren't directed at the people. They're directed at the government and what the government has done. And even if you ask them, they believe that the government has duped the people into these wars and convinced the people that they are doing the right thing, going into these countries and destabilizing these areas. And they have so many of these countries in their pockets. But the thing that's unique about the Gulf countries is that they don't have like anything on them. It's not an occupied government, but these Western, they're more pro-Western and they're against each other, that they just gravitate to the West, especially Mohammed bin Salman. He's against Islam completely, and he's trying to westernize the country, he's trying to westernize the people, and he'll do whatever he can to normalize ties with Israel. And another thing I think that Peter mentioned about, or I think it was you, Maze, about America in West Africa, in Burkina Faso, in the Sahel. And this is important because I'm not sure if you guys looked into the Jean Brigitte Macron fiasco, but they have basically the president of France's wife is a man, and this can basically be seen as a
Hold up, is that true? I thought that was a rumor. Is that
nah.
true?
Yeah, look into Candace Owens' research on it, and then do further research on it. This is completely. She's a man. She's definitely a man. But this can be seen as a further blackmail ring, and they have immense leverage over France because of this. And you see that in the West, in West Africa, when they're increasingly expressing anti-Western sentiments, now you see ISIS getting in there. Now you see ISIS going all the way from Iraq. Now suddenly they're in the Sahel, they're in West Africa, and they're causing chaos over there. And now that they kicked out France, they're having to fight ISIS, and this is all the CIA and Mossad. And people are recognizing this too, that there's no distinction to be made with this because Israel is in complete control of the United States. And everything, the US going around bullying all these countries benefits everyone at the top, which are the pro-Israeli Jews and Israel. All these wars, all they did was big up these military or industrial companies and give them all the more money while destabilizing all the hostile countries towards Israel. And they saw Iraq as a threat because Saddam he was pulling triggers left and right. He would invade Kuwait, he invaded Iran, and there's no doubt if what was going on right now was happening and Saddam was still in power, Saddam would invade Israel and he wouldn't even think twice about it. But even if they really wanted to target these terrorist groups, they would have invaded Saudi Arabia as well, because many of these terrorists were found to originate from Saudi Arabia and that some of it was planned there and these things. But Saudi has been in the pocket of America, not as much as it is right now, but in the fact that they've been the main vehicle to globalize the dollar. And then around like the late 70s, when they knew for sure that they had Saudi Arabia on their team and they can globalize the dollar with Saudi Arabia, then they were able to fully drop the gold standard with full confidence to move forward in this way. And now that the dollar is global, America just feels like when you control the money, you control everything, and they can do whatever they want without any sentiments. I think it was
Uh-oh.
I think he dropped.
Yeah, he might have got a phone call. Y'all check this out. And then I'm gonna go to the next hand. But so 2001 authorization for use of military force allows military action against those responsible for the 9/11 attacks. The authorization has since been stretched to cover operations against various, and they call it jihadist groups, quote unquote, worldwide, without additional congressional approval. So the executive branch authority, which was like all these, the different presidents, they unilaterally expanded the scope of the war on terror, often in secret, undermining the checks and balances of Congress. And then the Bush administration first set it down and established it. And they put the establishment of Guantanamo Bay detention camp. Obama administration ever since I learned how to like upload a document and have it have question and answer time and shit, it's so dope. I don't know if you guys do that, but you totally should. I'll read some more points in a minute, but I do want to talk about this Authorization Act. And whenever we find something that we understand is being exploited and it is being, obviously used in a, I would say, non-ethical way, what are the steps? And Carlos probably knows, but we do have a couple hands before we get to you. But like, what are the steps for remediation congressionally? I don't really know. Okay, let's go. I think Patrick is next, and then we'll go from there. Hi, Patrick.
I kind of talked about this before, and I probably also agree with me on this, like that I think like the United States has the best, produces like the best like